Hey everybody, my name is Cabra. Welcome back to Steel City Witch. Today we're gonna be answering, I'm gonna talk about my personal answer to the question, what is witchcraft, right? One thing that I have heard is that sometimes as American witches, we can put that word onto other people in other cultures where it doesn't necessarily belong. So for me, being an immigrant, I really needed to answer the question, like, what does witchcraft mean in English specifically? And I needed to do it in a way where when I'm translating between English, Spanish, and Portuguese, I'm translating in a way that's culturally sensitive, right? So let's talk a little bit about the cultural axis of this here alignment chart, which is the taboo keeping versus taboo breaking. I want to clarify first and foremost that I mean in ritual, right? I know some people who break taboo in ritual and then the rest of their life, they're pretty much normies, no shame in it, just the way that they are. I also know some people who keep taboos very strictly in ritual and then, the rest of their life, they're doing all kinds of stuff that our society deems as taboo, right? I'm talking specifically about your behavior in ritual when it comes to these two. The reason why this is a cultural thing is because taboos are cultural. In the United States, we have a very strong taboo against most magic, right? Depending on which Protestant you ask, you can tell them that they'll tell you that it's like devil something or other, to be doing anything from venerating saints and praying rosaries to using the Bible for bibliomantic divination to, praying psalms or using psalms as magical incantations, right? Like, people are very sensitive in certain parts of this country to something being a taboo. And in many ways, the idea that you can do something spiritual in order to aid your mundane efforts is a taboo in and of itself, not just among strict Protestants, but also among people sometimes who are atheists and agnostic, right? So I've definitely seen some people, don't get me wrong, I've seen some atheists and agnostics who are very friendly to these kinds of practices, but I've also seen some of them who are like actively trying to convince people to stop. So there is a taboo in the States just against doing any kind of magical whatever, but in other cultures, that taboo doesn't exist. The taboo for them isn't necessarily even how you do your rituals. Are you naked? No one cares. The taboo that matters for them is very simple. Are you fundamentally keeping a taboo of helping the community, or are you breaking that taboo and hurting the community, right? So making people's cows go dry, except in very specific cases where you're doing justice for something, that's breaking a taboo, right? Getting someone to leave their spouse, that would be breaking a taboo. And that would qualify you as a taboo breaking practitioner. But, there is nothing wrong with bringing a murderer to justice through a combination of mundane and magical means in these cultures, So when we say, hey, witches are taboo breakers, and we go over into other places and we're just like, hey, we do the same thing that makes you like me, you're a witch, they'll be like, I am not a witch. Do not put that word on me. And it's because there's this cultural gap where for an American, any kind of magic is taboo breaking, and taboo keeping involves doing things that we say are not magic, even though they kind of are. And in other cultures, magic's not taboo. People have been doing that for forever long. It's just, what are you doing with that magic, and who are you trying to help, and who are you trying to hurt? That's where it becomes a matter of taboo breaking versus taboo keeping. And I'm obviously glossing over what is an incredibly sensitive subject, right? But thinking about it in these terms means that when we translate from culture to culture and place to place and across time, we can be a little more culturally sensitive about who we call what and how we translate things in and out of English, right? So I think people have already pretty much figured that witchcraft is on the taboo breaking side of my diagram here. Let's talk about the second axis before we put it down, right? You've got the less money versus more money axis. There's some ways in which this is pretty self-explanatory. You know, if you want a 9-foot sword and to do a ritual room in your house that nobody does anything else in, that's more money, you know. If you're going to grab a dollar store pepper and a piece of paper, shove someone's name in it, and then chuck that in a fire, that's pretty cheap. Or, I mean, chuck it in your oven. I don't know. Chuck it in the local river. You didn't hear that idea from me. That's like a less money thing. Time, space, materials, this is pretty straightforward. The other thing, though, that I do want to bring up about this axis, it's a little subtle, is that people with less money versus people with more money had different concerns, right? So here, you're usually thinking about, I need $50 for groceries, like now, right? Once you get into here, you're like, ooh, I could really use a really fat bonus at work this year. I really hope that my tax return's a little better this year because I got a bill I got to pay off. And then round about here, you're doing things like, oh, I need a promotion at work, you know, or I need to go from having jobs to having a career. And then up here, you're at like, when do I declare war on this enemy nation, right? So it's a spectrum of concerns as well as materials. So I think it shouldn't surprise anyone then that for me, I place the English word witchcraft here. You are breaking taboos and you are doing it for not a lot of money. So a really great example of a technique that for me falls firmly in the witchcraft camp is going sky-clad for ritual. It breaks a bunch of taboos in a very cheap way to go into the local woods at night when no one will see you and then get naked and do your magic, right? It costs very little money to do that, you know, depending on how close your local public land where you're hoping no one will see you be naked spot is, right? Or, you know, just in your bedroom. I don't know. So then the question is, what are the other 3 quadrants, right? So if you're going to be translating folk magic, right? So that's cheaper stuff, and you're trying to translate it into other cultures, the most common English word you're actually going to find, sorry for knocking the camera there, is cunningcraft, right? Cunningcraft is very easy to translate actually into a lot of different cultures because that's where you get your rezadeiras, your benzadeiras, and sometimes your feiticeras, right? But 2 great examples of things I consider to be cunningcraft and not necessarily witchcraft are psalm magic. It's keeping a taboo, right? Especially if you're in a Christian majority country or a country that's hegemonically Christian, like the United States is. You get the Psalms. Most herbal tea-based magic also, to me, or herbal sachets fall under cunningcraft because there's nothing particularly taboo about that particular form of magic. Though, again, with the United States, any kind of magical undertaking kind of is a taboo breaker at this point still, so witchcraft would not be too out of place as a consideration. And also there are some herbal tea and herbal or magics that would fall under witchcraft, right? It's definitely a taboo if you happen to know the proper application of abortifacients to apply that medicine to someone, especially from a magical and spiritual context. Though at that point, I would say that we have left what I would call magical teas, and you've just moved into like straight up medicinal herbalism. Because it requires, and I cannot say this enough, proper medical knowledge to apply that medicine. You know, there's more than one way to gain that medical knowledge. I'm not saying you have to go to a nursing school or a medical school, but you do need to know things like dosage, counterindications, side effects, etc. But most magical herbal teas, like, you know, get a job tea, self-love tea, you know, these are things that usually fall under cunningcraft. So the question then now is, what are these things? Well, if you're keeping taboos and you have bougie amounts of money, that would make you a magician. And I would actually say angelic evocations are and planetary magic more generally. And I would actually also put astrology here because it does take some amount of time to study and learn. You got to do math. There's like a program you probably want to get a hold of. It's a whole thing. Though the programs are getting cheaper every year, which is nice. But the ability to study and do math is something that's still pretty pricey. So for that reason, I would consider astrology as a spiritual practice to be in that section. And then the last quadrant, which is the quadrant where I find myself, is sorcerer. Sorcery, the difference between magicians and sorcery, and sometimes be a matter of approach. There's a lot of taboo breaking on the bougie side of this square, to treating spirits as entities that are real and are to be respected and negotiated with on that level of, hey, we're equals, but I also recognize that you are bigger and older than me. The bigger part being debatable and the older part being debatable depending on the spirit, but the majority of them are bigger and older than you. Magicians have a tendency in keeping the taboos of the practice to very much come from the I'm your boss, you're going to listen to me method, unless you're talking to angels or planetary spirits. Very sky heavy stuff. You know, we turn to the sky in order to affect the earth. Sorcery can work very much from the ground up. Sorcery is also not afraid to give the devil a little blueberry now and then, just to be like, hey, remember me? Don't burn my house down, thanks, you know. But yeah, so this is how I define witchcraft. This is what I define witchcraft again. And these are some of my admonitions that come with my understanding, right? If you generally are doing bougie magic, it's important to understand also how to work without. Especially if you have like something where you're like, oh, I need $50 today. That's not the time to go find an astrological election and then wait 3 months and prepare. No, if you need $50 today, you need $50 today, right? Break out the mint, break out the basil, get on it, right? And there's that. What else is there? I think that's basically it for the video. Thank you for joining me on this short foray into the thing. Oh, a final note. I understand that hoodoo goes somewhere on this board. I don't know where. And I don't understand enough about hoodoo practices to really have an opinion. So if you're somebody who knows a lot about hoodoo and you think that it goes somewhere on this board, or you think, no, none of this describes hoodoo whatsoever, please feel free to stick that in my comments. I would love to hear your opinions. Try not to cuss each other out, though. Considering how few views my videos get, I don't think we're really going to get that spicy in here. And I like it that way. So have a good day, and I'll see you on the next one.